And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bash us, him.
Right, and we're live, baby.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We're live. Get to have my coffee with you fine people. Listen, we had a couple of hiccups yesterday. We apologize for that for our viewers that were live. Listen, life on the road, things happen. We're working on some Wi-Fi issues, but we're here doing our best. And let's get the content out to you. So sure enough, John reached out to me yesterday. He's like, dude, you got to hear this. I'm like, hear what? He said, check out this podcast. So sure enough, there's a deputy commissioner that was employed by the NYPD several years ago. And sure enough, just trashing the department. It's just total nonsense. Everything's bullshit. What's interesting about it, he's like, she's referring to the cops as knuckle draggers. And knuckle draggers, that's a derogatory term for black men. But when you listen to this podcast, you're going to realize it's discriminatory towards white alpha straight males. That.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to hear is we're going to hear two white people discuss what it's like to be black and blue. I was listening to this podcast yesterday. I couldn't believe what I heard. I put out a few clips on my social media and basically Reducing Crime podcast with Jerry Ratcliffe. He's a former British police officer turned academia, student of academia and privileged. And now we have Tanya Meisenholder on his show, who at the time was a deputy commissioner of equity and inclusion. And they're going to discuss what she learned about being black and blue in a post-George Floyd world. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to have a little watch party. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. I'm telling you right now, this has my blood boiled, and I know it does Eric. So we're going to get right into it and discuss. This is the part they're going into Tanya's career.
I can imagine it's also weird because you have an interesting topic area as well. What is your official title anyway?
Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion.
Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion. And what the hell does that actually mean?
So equity is about fairness and inclusion is about creating a sense of belonging.
Is that within the NYPD or is that for how the NYPD behaves externally to people outside the organization?
Both. So when I think about equity and inclusion, I think about the internal aspects of it in our employees, but then I consider the impact that it has on the communities we serve. So if we don't treat our employees well on the inside, then how do we expect them to treat others on the outside?
There you go, using all these kind of sensible principles. You're never going to get anywhere in policing with that.
I'm a civilian.
Yeah, but I mean, you've been in and around policing for a while, haven't you?
That's right. So I've been in policing for well over 20 years. Started in Birmingham, Alabama as an intern, worked some with the Birmingham, Alabama Police Department, and then spent several years upstate in Albany, Schenectady, and Troy police departments before I joined the NYPD about 14 years ago.
What were you doing upstate?
I was a crime analyst. I was working on my PhD in criminal justice. I'm from the South, and I thought that the North was an awful place and didn't think that I would stay there, but I engaged in my academic pursuits there. Soon realized that I was not going into academia.
Sensible move.
I was much better suited for policing. I met a guy. He became an NYPD cop. I followed suit, and I've been here for about 14 years.
And you've been a civilian in policing for about 14 years.
That's right.
Crime analyst. What an unsung, underpaid job that I think is so crucial to policing in the 21st century.
I was the first crime analyst in Schenectady, New York Police Department. And I worked for an incredible chief who embraced the work that I was doing, which at that time was very basic, like how do we display calls for service on a graph, and then didn't even touch how do we use this in terms of tactics and strategies. I do think it is an underutilized resource in law enforcement more generally.
Yeah.
It's really complicated in the NYPD where we have so many precincts and different ways of thinking about crime analysis.
But you also have really different communities here.
We do. Very diverse communities. Every precinct is different, and there's communities within communities. And then beyond patrol precincts, we also have housing commands, transit commands, and how we police those broadly is very different. And then how we analyze crime in those areas is different.
given that there are such diverse communities across the city, I mean, the size and scope of the NYPD, I think, is unfathomable to most people in policing. This is one of the first offices of its kind in any police department, right?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, it is the first office in a law enforcement setting. So we were established in 2018, and it's really an evolution of our Equal Employment Opportunity Office. But thinking about how do we drive issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion forward.
And I think
I'm glad you stopped right there, because at this point, honestly, I need a breather. At this point, anyone who's live right now, if you're on with us right now, you probably need a breather too. And we haven't even gotten to the thick of this yet, and my blood is boiling already. But at some point, you're going to hear that they refer to cops as knuckle draggers. So when John reached out to me and said, listen, you got to listen to this podcast, I said, knuckle draggers. They're calling the cops knuckle draggers. That's a derogatory term that I would not use, because that's a derogatory term for black men. It's almost it's on par with using the N-word, which I would not use. But what's interesting about this, there's two different things I'd like to peel back real quick, right? So we know that New York City is completely diverse already, right? But she doesn't mention that as part of her title. But she's comparing her experience. She worked in Birmingham, Alabama, Troy, in Albany, New York. Now, that is completely homogenous in comparison to the New York City Police Department. So New York City was already the most diverse police department.
There we go again with Eric's fucking mic.
Yeah, I just glitched. But sure enough, she's talking about belonging, right? Listen, this is not a sport where you get participation trophies. We need the best and the most suitable to serve the New York City Police Department or any police department. I'm just going to say this right here. Everything she says is complete bullshit. But what's interesting about this is this trash that she's talking is while she was employed by the New York City Police Department. So two things either happened. This went completely unnoticed, or the old white male guard of the New York City Police Department that are complete cowards were aware of this and they remained silent.
So this podcast came out. Well, it came out a long time ago. It came out in 2021, in March of 2021. She was the then Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion in the NYPD. Since that time, the diversity alligator has eaten her, and she's been replaced by Wendy Garcia, another lifelong civilian in the police department. So you're going to hear a lot of different things from her around the importance of civilians, the importance of academia. But I just take note here. This is two white people talking about how it is to be black and blue in the police department. One, a British police officer, two, the Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion. And you're going to hear her disdain, not only for male white police officers, but for police officers in general, because she's a civilian, and you hear that in her already.
It's important to send a signal that the status of an office with real structure and personnel and attention to policy and practice is I think it's really great in the 21st century. We should have been doing this a long time before, but we're getting there, right?
That's right. And I can say that since we've been established, we've received requests from several other police departments who are interested in establishing offices, or at least personnel assigned to offices around equity and inclusion. So in many ways, the NYPD leads the way.
When they contact you, what do you tell them? I mean, what are the benefits in setting up an office of this kind within an organization?
We talk to them first about how this office is organized. And I think it's important to note that we are very much internally focused, whereas we have other bureaus that focus on the external aspects related to equity and inclusion. And so we make that very clear. We talk to them about what our structure is like, where our focus areas are, and where the challenges are, and driving change forward, especially cultural change, for something that sounds very philosophical.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine some kind of knuckle draggers with 30 years in the job. Probably it sounds all a bit warm and fuzzy, right?
We have some employees who very much understand what we do, why we do it, why it's important. And then we have resistors who want nothing to do with it and don't understand why we have an office like this in the NYPD.
So sure enough, it's interesting. When John reached out to me, I said, knuckle draggers. He said, yeah, listen to this. They're calling the cops knuckle draggers. So right now my blood is boiling. I'm sure your blood is boiling. Listen to this also. But I said that's a derogatory term used for black males. But when you listen to this podcast, you realize they actually just converted it and they're using it as a slang term and derogatory term. White alpha white males. This is absolutely ridiculous to hear this. This is trash coming from someone that was employed by the New York City Police Department. And at the same time, the old white male guard of the New York City Police Department that's still working right now in the upper echelon remains out as they sit idle and allow this trash to be spoken about their men and women with their boots on the ground doing one of the most difficult jobs in the entire world.
She absolutely is horrific, right? She first of all, she never explained what the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion actually does. Oh, what we do, what we put into place. She never actually tells you what their mission is. We're trying to drive change. Great. Well, you're trying to drive change. Okay, what does that mean? You know, it's all buzzwords. She never really gets into it because, like we said often on this podcast, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion does everything but provide diversity, equity, inclusion. What it should be called is the anti-white male office. And how do we get rid of white males in policing office? That's what it should be. So let's further this discussion with two white people discussing how it is to be black and blue. These are my favorite. The academians in policing are my favorite police officers. They've never actually policed on the streets of New York City or anywhere else for that matter, but they're going to run New York City, tell you how to police, and tell you how wrong the police department is. Here we go. We're going to continue this further.
Well, Jack Maple, who's a famed detective from this very police department, once wrote that sort of 10% of the department at any time is actively seeking to undermine any good thing that you want to try and do.
I would raise it above 10% if I was asked that question.
Well, and it probably increases dramatically based on how new and innovative or just different each initiative is, right?
For sure. And then if you think about generational issues, as you indicated, or gender issues, when you talk about creating a safe space where employees feel like they belong, that doesn't necessarily resonate with the police officer on the street who's responding to calls for service on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, you've got people who get out into the districts, get out into the precincts, and that's where they spend their career.
That's right.
But I wonder sometimes if they're a little oblivious to see the change in the new police officers that are coming on board, because it's a very different generation.
I couldn't agree more. I think the folks that are coming in now have different values, different motivations, different desires from what they expect a career in law enforcement. And I think it's a challenge for those that have been around for a long time to recognize that and to think about what that means and why it's important.
But
I'm glad you stopped it right there. You have to listen to that, right? You have to listen to these words and actually dissect it, right? So right now, at this point, we know that white alpha straight males that are employed by the New York City Police Department are referred to as knuckle draggers, which is normally a derogatory term towards black males, but we've completely converted it. She doesn't refer to her office as diversity, equity, inclusion, just equity, inclusion, because New York City at this point is extremely diverse. They admit to it when they talk about it in this podcast, but the NYPD is the most diverse police department in the entire country and arguably in the entire world. And yet she worked in other police departments that were much more homogenous than the NYPD. So what's interesting about this also is, listen, I watch NFL, I watch the NBA. I love to watch sports. I've been watching sports my whole life. I'm sure you do too. Whoever's live here right now, you watch sports. But there's a difference between watching the game than being in the game. She's watching the game. At some point, he talks in this podcast how, well, you've been around policing, so you must understand it. Yes, she's watching the game, but she's not in the game. So she suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what she also talks about here is values. She says that the younger people coming on, that they have different values. So what she's saying is the values of the white alpha male, again, it goes back to white guilt, are not in par with what they want for this office of equity inclusion, because we need a safe space, because it's not a safe space with the white males that we have right now. And while this is happening, the old white male guard of the police department, Terrence Monahan, Jimmy O'Neill, Dermot Shea, and now, of course, John Schell, and many others, Michael Kemper, they sit by, they sit idle, and they say nothing. Cowards. And yet this person was employed by the New York City Police Department, simultaneously putting this podcast out. This is complete trash.
She was more than employed. She was creating policy, and she was actually picking and choosing who was going to remain in the police department during the religious exemptions. I mean, she talks about that the new police officer has different values. Could we describe what those values are, Tanya? Could you tell us what the values of an older police officer versus the newer? Could you tell us the difference in that? Because I would love to know what values I'm missing that aren't good enough. I'd love to know what values Eric should have and the rest of the 30-year knuckle draggers, what they should have. What are those values, right? And TC says, do you remember when the NYPD used to fight crime? I do. It was a great time, but that's not the NYPD today. The NYPD today is not fighting crime. The NYPD today is fighting this made-up white supremacist in New York City. So, I mean, let's get further into this. This is just a telltale. This whole podcast just shows exactly how racist this department has become, how racist New York City has become. And you should look at this and say, why are white people going along with this? Why would a white woman want to talk about white people this way? She may have kids that are white, right? We're sitting here talking about making it a safe space for everyone, but I don't feel safe having this conversation. Eric doesn't feel safe having this conversation. This is completely creating tribalism. It's group identifying. It's completely wrong. The office should be eliminated. The police department should actually put out a statement and really let everybody know exactly what the office of equity and inclusion is exactly doing.
Used to be a badge of honor, didn't it? Once you have like double digit years, you got 10, 15 years in, it's fairly standard to say, well, this is shit. It's always been that way. And this is what you've got to put up with.
That's right.
But what you're actually trying to do is to kind of create the organization that's more supportive, especially I'm guessing for younger officers.
For younger officers, for women,
Yeah.
for the LGBTQ employees, any number of people who are coming on this job with different perspectives, different life experiences, and want different things from the job. There is resistance from people that have been around for some time, and dealing with that is complicated, and sometimes you just have to go around those folks.
Yeah, that's a hard one though, isn't it?
So we got a comment here from Sherry Albo. It reflects on what you said before, John. I agree. She says exclusion and division creating groups. That's exactly what's going on here. Tribalism. What they do is they're creating groups and they're creating cliques, and it's contradictory towards the fraternity and the camaraderie of policing, which you need to actually be effective of public safety. This is, again, I'm going to say this again, it's complete trash what's actually getting regurgitated from Tanya. I can't wait. I hope that Tanya takes us on the invitation to come on this podcast. I'd love to have a discussion on this. I'm curious of what she thinks about myself, Eric Dim, as a special operations lieutenant, the NYPD that was coined the most complaint cop. I'm sure she thinks that I'm a knuckle dragger and I have different values than the values of the police officers that she's talking about. What's interesting is we see that this is done by design, that this has been happening over several years, that the police department to change in nomenclature. I was saying for years that candidate assessment was affected by DEI, that if you're a white male, in order to get this job, you have to be meek, timid, and docile. If not, you have to be LGBTQ or black or brown. Other than that, if you're an alpha white straight male, you are not getting this job. And sure enough, you're not getting this job now. They'll find a way to psych you. But while this has happened, the old white male guard, the token pale white faces of the police department sit idle while this is just completely discriminatory and it's racist. It's not reverse racism. It's not reverse discrimination. It's just outright discrimination. She talks about how we need the LGBT community. I support LGBT. I support people that are gay. I have no issues with it, but let's get the most suitable. It has to be organic. I've worked with plenty of gay police officers that were fantastic. I had gay Marines that were great. But that's not what we're talking about here. We have to get the most suitable people, and whatever their background is not important. It should not be a control factor. But this is what we hear getting regurgitated from Tanya Meisenholder, just absolute trash, while simultaneously implementing policy for the NYPD, just a complete infection. And of course, she removes the word diversity because she knows it's already diverse. And when people speak, they remove words when they know there's guilt involved in it. And this is all white guilt.
It's pretty wild, man. So Sherry's asking, how can we in a neighborhood community level oppose and try to defeat DEI? One is we can point out the hypocrisy, like what we're going to do now. We're going to expose that everything that she says, she's going to completely contradict herself, which she already has done. right? She wants to make a level playing field for everyone. She wants everyone to feel included, but there's going to be resistors. She doesn't say why there's resistors or what they're actually resisting, right? So first, I think as a society, we need to sit there and say, group identifying, which is illegal in this country, group pushing groups down to build others up is illegal. It violates equal opportunity law, right? It's been illegal for almost 100 years at this point. Maybe 60 years it's been illegal for. So that's one. We could not be afraid to have these conversations. I think that's what we need to do. And you know, TC brings up another great point where he says, what I wanted from the job was a paycheck and the chance to help out and do some cool stuff. Is that different from other racial groups? And the question, and the answer to that is absolutely not. But according to these white academians, it is, right? According to that, it is. And I sit here and I'm listening to this and I just hear more division and racism. And it's wild, the people they pick to push it down. Let's continue.
Because you're never going to bring everybody with you. And that must be particularly difficult for anybody that stands out because it's such a cultural job. It's such a teamwork oriented job. For somebody who stands out and a little bit different, it must be really challenging to work in a big organizational environment.
Yeah, it is. And think about, as a young officer, what it's like to speak up or stand up to someone that has been around for a long time, that knows far more than they do about policing. When they see something, when they hear something that doesn't sound quite right to them or doesn't sit well with them. So there is a power dynamic that you are really working against at all times in the organization.
And that can manifest in two ways, because you can have people that are the same rank as you, but they hold status within the organization for being what we used to call an old sweat, you know, being around a bit. But then it also can manifest itself as people who have rank as well. And people don't leave jobs because the job's awful. People leave jobs because the boss is awful.
But in law enforcement, it's not always so easy to leave.
No, that's right. Yeah, even in big organizations.
We know that we lose about 50% of any recruit class by the time they have 10 years on. And for those that stay past 10 years, when you really think about who are we retaining for how long? And that's part of the work that we do in equity and inclusion, is think about that. For instance, are Black males leaving at a higher rate than their white counterparts?
That's got to be hugely concerning.
It is concerning. It's difficult enough to recruit and hire certain demographics into the organization, and it's even more challenging at times to keep them.
I can see the challenges in multiple ways. First of all, there's just a huge investment in those people. But secondly, you know, given the nature of policing in urban environments, especially big East Coast cities like Philadelphia and Baltimore and New York, you know, those are the very officers that send such a great signal to the community about inclusion, about employment, about role models in the community. And to be losing those at a faster rate, that just must be a horrible challenge to try and address.
It is very challenging. And I think one of the questions that you have to raise is, you know, are they institutionalized into the policing culture? So we've had a number of losses this year, both in terms of deaths due to COVID, and we've had many officers retire from policing. So our numbers are way up.
In terms of separating, in terms of leaving the department?
Yep. And that's due to the climate that we're in. That's due to the fiscal crisis that we're in. And for some, it's due to changes in policing that they don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd just like to go back to that question that Sherry Albel asked, and I think it's a fantastic question because it actually correlates to what we hear right now. When she said, how can we in a neighborhood community level oppose and try to defeat DEI? Now, I said all the time, DEI is a complete infection of law enforcement on the local, state level, and actually we see it on the national level, and we recently seen it with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the infection of DEI in law enforcement. Now, what I can say by that, leadership is responsible for an organization to thrive, and it also takes the blame when an organization crumbles. So we have to look at leadership in the NYPD, any local enforcement agency, any law enforcement agency, but we also have to look at leadership in the community. Who is leading the community? What are they saying? And that's why we reflect and we're so critical of the upper echelon of the NYPD, because the old white token pale faces, they refuse to speak up. That's what this comes down to. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. They have to speak out in opposition of this complete discrimination of the alpha white straight male in the police department. It comes down to actually being vocal and not sitting idle, remaining silent as a coward because you're worried about your self-serving careers. And what's interesting here, I think this is subliminal messages. What they're saying here is that they're having a retention problem with minorities or maybe people that fit the LGBT community. So because they're having that issue, instead, they found ways to remove the alpha white males through the vaccine mandates, through the Civilian Complaint Review Board and other facets, so that they can make sure that the NYPD has a diverse appearance. But it doesn't. It no longer has a diverse appearance. Actually, at this point, it's approximately 54% Black and brown minority. So no longer is it diverse. It's more homogenous now than it was before. It's a complete infection. And it's people like this, Tanya Meisenholder, that's infected a police department and ultimately has a correlation to what's going on in New York City right now when it comes to public safety. Again, we have to look at leadership. Leadership is responsible to speak up and protect the police officers and protect the community.
You know, it's funny. After she had this conversation, she fired Marlon Bethel, Black immigrant, for refusing to comply, right? And she says that Blacks and minorities leave at a higher rate than the rest of the job. And it's so challenging and it's so horrible. But she never gives one reason on why they leave. But then she goes in to say, well, people leave because policing's changing and they can't handle the change. So is that the reason that they're leaving? You know, Jordan Peterson once said, and I think it was brilliant what he said. He said, there's more differences amongst groups than between groups. So what that means is, if you're a male police officer, it doesn't matter when you break down a male police officer, or you break down a male white police officer, or a male Black police officer, there's going to be less differences amongst male police officer than there will be if you just look at male Black police officer. There's more differences amongst that group than between the two groups. They're closer at the top. Male police officer, they have the same, it's closer together. So again, she's group identifying. It's a complete low resolution conversation, because she's not identifying. She's just group identifying. Oh, Blacks and minorities leave at a higher rate. Doesn't tell you why, but then again pushes back to the evil white man who's leaving, right? Who's leaving because there's change in policing. What's that change in policing? What is that specifically? What are you talking about? Is that change good? Is it bad? And specifically, why are these people leaving? Because if it was your concern, you would identify, you would know directly off the top of your head why these people are leaving and what should be done to stop that, right? And the other thing that we never talk about is, when we look at diversity, equity, inclusion especially in police departments, the police department has always been organically made up of the makeup of New York City. We've implemented this and we've actually lost that organic. We lost that actual diversity in New York City. Look at pictures of the 70s and 80s. You see Black cops, you see Puerto Rican cops, you see Italian cops, you see Irish cops. You know, were they predominantly times when groups outweighed other groups? Yeah, and there always will be, because that's organic, right? We're not forcing anything. What this office is seeking to do is force. And I mean, it just gets worse and worse as we go on.
Yeah, you kind of have to admire anybody that signs on the line and walks into a recruiting office to join policing at the moment.
Yeah, it's tough. And so thinking about, how do we reach some of these people that are not interested in a career in law enforcement? So you have people that are interested, you have people that are aware of the opportunities, and then you have those that are qualified. And we know right now, we've always struggled with Black males in particular, with females, especially Asian females. How are we going to get them in to take the test?
Are there processes you can put in place to actually help these underrepresented groups with the process of just getting into the department?
Yeah, one of the things that we're working on here, we refer to as barriers. So one of the core missions in OEI is to really think about how we identify and address barriers throughout the entire employee life cycle. So from recruitment, what's preventing someone from even applying to take the job, and then what is preventing them from moving throughout the hiring process.
Do you have any examples?
So the psychological exam, for instance.
I certainly couldn't pass that these days.
Well, I couldn't either. So we know that certain groups fail the psych at a different rate than others. We also know that certain groups get through the background check at a different rate than others. So really looking at all of that and thinking about what's happening and why, and what can we do to change in order to make it easier for people to join the department. So for instance, years ago, you would not have been able to join the NYPD if you had a background with marijuana use. It's not the case today. And that has an impact on any number of people.
That all sounds reasonable for kind of obvious groups, people of color, that it's acceptable in America and society to retain that kind of demographic information.
I got to laugh at one of the comments. I mean, TC's been all over it today, but he said, how hard is it to draw a house? I mean, that's kind of funny because we all know part of the psych exam, the actual written psych exam, which is about 6 hours, the end of it, you actually have to draw a house. And you actually have to name what's your favorite song. So it's interesting that they said they have to make the psych easier. You know, I'm going to give this example. So I have a cousin of mine who was in college, white male. I mean, extremely docile, which fits what they should hire, right? I mean, extremely respectful, so nice. What's interesting about him, he's Jewish like me. He grew up in Washington Heights. So he had a Dominican nanny. So he speaks Spanish fluently. He's as white as snow like myself. Who wouldn't want this kid to be a New York City police officer? He could be an undercover. He speaks Spanish fluently. Perfect. And sure enough, he got the red cup syndrome. He was psyched off the job. I remember him reaching out to me. He's like, what happened here? I was like, what did I do wrong? So I said, listen, and I could never get anyone to admit it, and I can't get anyone to admit it now. Anyone from Canada assessed me. Clearly, if you're a white, straight male, it's impossible to get this job. They will find a way to psych you up. And yet she talks about making the psych easier because certain people fail it. And what's also interesting about that, John, if you heard her say, that they're trying to target people that they think should be on this job because they fit this diversity, equity, inclusion path, but yet they're not interested. Why are we targeting people that are not interested in law enforcement? That should be one of the prerequisites, that you actually have enthusiasm for this type of profession, because it's not just a job, it's a life. You're a life of wanting to help people. They say you're a cop 24/7. So why would we want to target people that don't want to do this job? Again, this is completely manufactured, what they're saying here. My blood is boiling while I'm listening to this. I'm sure your blood is boiling also, how this person was implementing policy. Again, we hear this stuff from this woke movement, and she's exactly part of this woke movement. What we hear coming out of her mouth is the same thing we hear from New York City Council, and it's the same thing we hear from the Civilian Complaint Review Board, just a bias and disdain for the actual nomenclature of the police department. And what John said is right. The police department is organic. If we look at, we have a database called 360 within the police department, and it shows the comparison, the manpower for the police department and the percentages, the breakdown of the ethnicities. And it's reflective of actually what's going on in New York City. But sure enough, with the inception of Mayor Eric Adams and also this DEI infection, no longer is it actually reflective of the community. It's actually top heavy of black and brown. And it should be the most suitable. Doesn't matter where it comes out to. And what you were talking about earlier, that really comes down to nepotism. We see it right now. When it comes to fraternal organizations, we might see in leadership there might be more white sometimes because they're affiliated with the Emerald Society, or we might see more blacks because they're with the 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement. And what we see right now is we see that the police commissioner is part of the Hispanic Society, so we see a lot of Hispanics who are getting promoted to detective. But that's more when it comes to nepotism and cronyism. But what we're talking about here is just complete DEI, which is removing the white, straight alpha male. And sure enough, we hit the mark on this podcast. We did a podcast about a year and a half ago, even before this was discovered, make the NYPD masculine again. So this is just further emasculation of the police department. And what's interesting about the woke movement She gives buzzwords, just like John said before. She never gives solutions, just buzzwords. We need police officers with better values. What are those values? We need police officers that fit the community. Who are those police officers? Who is the dangerous white man? Again, buzzwords, no solutions.
So why do we want to target Asian females who don't want to take the job? How does that make policing better, NYPD better? And clearly what you just heard, you heard them both talk about, and what she confirmed is what myself and Eric have been saying, that DEI lower standards, and that's exactly what they just told you. Oh, we want to hire based upon skin color, is what they said, which is illegal. So we want to hire more blacks, particularly male blacks. We want to hire that, but they have a problem passing the psych, so they group identify them. Also, another racist statement coming from two white academia Democrats. Oh, we have a problem hiring them. So what do? We just pass them through the psych when there's things that clearly flag, and these people shouldn't be police officers because there was a standard set of who passes the psych and who doesn't, right? So we lower the psychiatric thing, and now we have police officers of every color and of every gender and of every sexual preference that are on prescription psychiatric medication. I think that most common sense people could agree these people shouldn't be carrying a gun if they're temperamental, or shouldn't be responding to high stress situations, high stress environments, and working around the clock where you're not able to sleep, you're not eating right. We need people in peak physical and mental condition. We shouldn't be taking rookies that aren't in those shape and doing that. So what they said is we lowered standards for that. We completely lowered standards for that. And then she goes in and further and starts to talk about criminality in the background. And what does he say? Oh, yeah, because they traditionally use drugs. So again, he's group identifying black people and saying that all black people smoke pot and use drugs. And I'm sitting here going, is this legit? These are the people that are going to teach all of us to not be racist. These are the people. They were all teaching us. But I think personally, we need this, right? New York City needs it. We need to get female Asian police officers, female Asians who don't want to be police officers to be police officers. This is the problem. I think the problem was when I call 911, somebody's going to come and protect my family, my children, myself, or whoever is calling. They're going to run towards shots fired. They're going to run into a building that's going to collapse. I want people that want to be there. I don't care what they look like, who they sleep with, whatever it is, but that's not what you're hearing from here. Let's go further into this debacle of academia brain, the leftist Democrat mind of how they perceive police officers and how they perceive public safety.
But what do you do about finding ways to support and to encourage participation of the LGBTQ plus community?
Right, that's a great question. And I think in terms of demographic data on our employees, it's really important to think about the demographic data going back historically for a really long time. For instance, right now, I know that our most recent recruit class was 24% female. But I also know that we've only moved the needle on females from 15% to 19% in the overall representation over the past 20 years.
Well, if there's any consolation, moving to like 19% puts you ahead of just about every state police in the country.
It does. So we have the basic information, race, gender, age. But what you're asking about is how do we collect that information that's not reported in your average, census document?
Yeah, it's kind of that merging of sort of gender and sexual orientation and that whole area, isn't it?
So intersectionality, right? The merging of all of your different identities. Some are compliance issues. So for instance, this year, we recently updated our personnel system to collect information on gender identity.
How do people feel about being asked about that?
Right now, we're asking new employees, so people that are coming onto the job. I have heard no negative accounts of anyone being asked that question. Our employees that are more tenured have the option to self-report that information in the new personnel system, which will be online soon.
And the reason I ask is that we can't address problems if we don't have data on the nature of the problem.
That's right.
But, NYPD are a relatively progressive organization. You have an office of equity and inclusion that we're sitting in right now. But I just wonder about some of the, how do I put this politely, less progressive police departments and sheriff's offices that are out there. how comfortable people would be about volunteering information that is very personal in that regard.
I don't think they'd be comfortable at all.
No.
You're muted, guy.
No, I'm not muted now. Michelle, you hear that? This is a progressive police department. Exactly right. And you know what? This has been the making. So, well, progressive police department at this point. Again, this is just total trash what we're hearing. Listen, John, I was a police officer almost 20 years. You were a police officer almost 20 years yourself. Despite our rank, I always feel that you're a police officer who leads other police officers, whatever your rank is. But listen, I've been to numerous shootings, the most heinous crimes, and I've never went to a scene where someone was fighting for their life. They're bleeding out, we're there helping them. I've never had somebody look at me and go, oh my God, thank God you're Jewish. Or, oh my God, are you straight? Are you gay? Because I need someone gay to help me. No one cares. This is the most ridiculous thing. No one cares what the police officer is. Believe me, when your life is on the line, no one cares what you look like. No one cares what you sound like, who you love. They just want the best, most suitable police officer to save their life. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is all manufactured. But what's interesting is they keep saying here the problems of policing. But they don't tell you what the actual problems are. What are these problems? Because I haven't heard it yet. We just hear buzzwords. That's all I hear from this woke progressive movement. They're right. The police department is progressive. It's more progressive now than ever. But this has been in the making because of people like this that have infected the police department with this whole DEI movement. It's absolutely ridiculous what I hear right here. I think that we're at a point in this conversation where clearly the entire white portion of the job, the white alpha males, are just completely demonized. And what's sad about this, again, this goes back to what I'm saying, that either this was unnoticed, and I find it hard to believe that this was unnoticed because everybody talks, that the white leadership, the white males of the police department allowed this infection, allowed her to implement policy. Nobody stood up. These are cowards. Allowed her to stay in the soapbox just to basically just completely ridicule the police department and say that we need these people. Why do we want people that don't want to be there? Do we want exactly what you said before? Do we want Asian females if they don't want to be there? This is a profession that you should have complete enthusiasm to take part. We shouldn't just be scraping anyone and say, well, would you like a job? Because this is more than a job. It's not just a job. This is a lifestyle. You have to love it. You have to love people. You have to have compassion. I guess my blood is boiling when I listen to this. I'm sickened by this. And I'm sure everyone else that's sitting there listening say, you almost can't believe the words that are coming out of their mouths. And the both of them are like parroting each other. It's like two parrots. Oh, yeah, right. Absolutely. The police department's so screwed up. I mean, but yet the most diverse city in the entire world, the police by the most diverse police department. And yet we're going to infect it because that's exactly what they did.
TC says the job will not be whole until we hire an entire class of Eskimos. And I mean, that's kind of where we're going, right? That's kind of where we're going. So I put out a post a while back on social media, and everybody said I was anti-cop for doing it, even though myself and Eric Dim actually support the rank and file more than their own unions or their own supervisors. We criticize the structure of the NYPD and the leadership of the NYPD. So they pretend and hide behind the hard work of the actual rank and file whom we support and try to paint us as anti-police. And what I said was, at the time, I said the NYPD is a woke organization. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that this interview existed. I just found it yesterday listening to podcasts while I work out. So I didn't know that in 2021, the Deputy Commissioner of Equity Inclusion actually declared the NYPD is a woke organization. She says it right there. We're a progressive organization. And then Jerry comes in. What would the less progressive departments across the country, what did he mean? The good old boys, the male white, what did he call us? Knuckle draggers? That's what he meant by that. So pay attention to these acts, pay attention to the words. And I invited both of them to come on this podcast. I doubt we will ever hear a single thing from them, even though they have PhDs, even though they're experts, they're very sophisticated. I don't believe they would be able to sit in the room. And I believe every idea they present will fail after one question. And we'll be very respectful to them, but they won't come on here because their ideas are lies. all of this is being done for their own personal gain to push further in this DEI movement. I sat in a training in NYPD, and I forget what it was called. It was called implicit bias training. And the whole thing was nonsense, and I won't get into it. But I said to the chief at the end of the day, we went back and forth in the class. I went to the chief. I said, this entire thing is nonsense. And he goes, yeah, but I'm getting paid good money doing this on my days off. And I'm going to have a huge salary. I'm retiring soon. And they're paying me a huge salary to do this. I was like, yeah, so what? I was like, so what? I said, as long as you could sleep at night while you're selling your soul, I guess that's all that matters, right? I was like, because the whole premise of this training is a lie, and it fails at one question. You couldn't answer one of my questions. Completely racist. So let's get it back into these people. We'll listen to them further sell their soul and fatten their bank accounts while they do it.
We have a Gay Officers Action League, which is very active. We do a lot of work with them in our office. And one of the things that they continuously raise is the lack of data on LGBTQ employees.
Right.
You also have to remember that you have some that are out and others that are not and don't want to be. So that's an individual issue that you have to reconcile. In 2019, we did the first ever employee survey on LGBTQ. Voluntary, of course.
That must have been fascinating.
It was fascinating. It was one, just to see how many people actually responded, the reaction to some folks that we did it. And to your point, some people reacted very poorly because there are many people that still do not agree.
But that's a data point.
It is a data point.
It's not a positive one. It's not a good one, but it's a data point.
But what we're moving to is to collect sexual orientation data in our personnel database. So we have vetted the fields, and we will make that as a self-report option in the upcoming months. I do believe that we will absolutely be the first law enforcement agency to collect self-reported information on sexual orientation. I think the challenge will be is that you will get a number of people in the LGBTQIA+ community who will provide this data, and then you will have a lot of others who will not answer the questions.
Right. It's almost a catch-22 situation, because to feel comfortable answering those kind of questions, you have to create an inclusive office. So if you don't have an inclusive office, you don't get the information, but that's probably the reason that a lot of people might be leaving.
Yep. And it's very difficult for people to reconcile that. You know, at the end of the day, I think what an officer is thinking when he's out on the street with someone who doesn't think or act like they do is, what does it mean for me in this moment? In the moment, you don't necessarily care that this person is gay or bisexual or whatever the case may be. But when you go back to the command, you might think about it a different way.
Right. And that's an interesting way to frame this, because there is a sense with most officers, I think, fortunately, and I'm very grateful for it, is that the sense of overwhelming professionalism. I'm working with officers right now in Philadelphia. And
first of all, the NYPD, to their credit, the NYPD is way ahead of their time when it comes to addressing the Gay Officers Action League, way before the DEI infection has ever come to law enforcement. So what she's saying is just complete hogwash at this point. I started the job in January 2004. John, you came 6 months later. And at that time, even during recruit training, we have the Gay Officers Action League come speak to us. We have members of the LGBTQ that are police officers. And I can tell you this, New York City kids who become New York City cops and are pretty versatile and adversarial. And I've never worked with anyone who's like, I'm not working with that guy because he's gay. I never heard that. This is absolutely ridiculous that they have to perpetuate this and have data on sexual orientation. And that's why I say when it comes to people that are part of the woke progressive movement, all you have to do is test their logic, because there's no logic behind this. I mean, honestly, I was a white male working in the South Bronx, and I didn't have opposition from the community. My opposition was from the Civilian Complaint Review Board that's infected with people of compromised integrity that are part of this woke progressive movement trying to emasculate the police department. I worked in the South Bronx, and these people welcomed me in my home. 99% of that area is black and brown. They didn't care if I was straight. They didn't care if I was gay. They didn't care if I was Jewish. They cared if I treated fairly and respected them, and they showed me respect, and we had that mutual communication. This is all hogwash right here. They could care less what your sexual orientation is. again, goes back to someone that is fighting for their life. I've never seen someone ask the police officer, before you help me, what is your sexual orientation? Because when your life is on the line, you pray to God and you're glad that a police officer is there and you're glad that God brought you this police officer to help you. You don't care if they're Asian, female, gay, straight. This, again, just is complete opposition of their logic. This is woke ideology. They give you the problems, they give you the symptoms, they give you the side effects, but they never tell you what exactly the problem is, the root causes of it, and they don't tell you what solutions are. They just give you some hogwash that's somewhere in the middle. And yet, if they were to come on this podcast, despite their so-called academia, they would not last in the room with John and I, even with respect, because their own observations, their own statements would box them in with their direct statements, and they would actually make themselves look foolish, just as they do right now if you chew on the information that they're saying.
I just don't understand why we care about anybody's sexual preference whatsoever. I don't understand it at all, the sexual orientation. I wouldn't hire anyone, any of my businesses, and sit there and be like, oh, so how do you like to have sex at night? Would you like to have multiple partners, or do you like to have same-sex partners? Is there particular positions that you enjoy more? I don't reveal my sex life. I don't expect anybody else to. So why would I expect my employees? And honestly, Eric, I think the NYPD has done a horrific job at supporting gay officers. I think they've done a great job at demonizing people who aren't gay. I don't think they've done a great job at representing officers, because again, and TC points out, he's been on fire today, so TC, he points it out perfectly. The NYPD's goal, the Gay Officers Action League, is banned from attending the gay pride parade, and they've been for years because they're cops. So how is that inclusive? How does the NYPD, who polices that detail, who gives the permit for that detail, allow that to happen? So they haven't done a great job at supporting their officers, and I believe they've boxed them in even more. What's your sexual? Oh, you gay? What do you like to do? Creeps. They're creeps. This thing is being done to further an agenda. I never cared. I have cousins that are gay. I have friends that are gay. I don't care what you do. Don't push your nonsense on me. I won't push my nonsense on you. We're not going to talk about your sex life. I'm not going to talk about my sex life. That's normal. We're going to hang out. You could bring your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever they are, your wife. Doesn't matter to me. I don't care. We're going to hang out. We're going to talk. We're not going to delve into what we're doing. I'm not going to tell you about what me and my wife do. Why do I care about what you guys do? It is what it is. Your business. We're people. But the narrative that they're trying to paint here is that you're dumb. The police are dumb, racist, homophobic, knuckle draggers, when it couldn't be further from the truth. Where is the evidence that police are homophobic? Where is the evidence that police are racist? Where is it? It's nowhere. The only where that evidence comes from is from white people who are overly educated and, what I like to say, overly indoctrinated, like these two.
John, before you press play, hold on. I just want to say this. I totally agree with what you're saying. When I say when the NYPD is supportive of the Gay Officers Action League, I mean the rank and file. I mean the cops that I worked with never cared that anyone's gay. I'm not talking about the NYPD itself. I do think the NYPD is ahead of their time when it comes to DEI, of trying to address the LGBTQ and have them inclusive part of the fraternal part of the NYPD. But you're right when it comes to that, actually standing up for them at the actual parade. But I will say this. There's one thing I want to say before you go into this. I've never heard that term in my life, sexual orientation data. I don't even understand what that means. Again, you're right. We don't ask what sexual data from heterosexual people or homosexual. Does it even matter? I just think that this is absolutely, it doesn't have a place in the workplace. It's absolutely ridiculous what they're speaking about anyway. It doesn't fit the conversation.
Trafficking, drug area, people with a lot of problems. And the officers are dealing with people in a very professional manner. And yet, privately, they may say, I could never be like this. How do people let themselves be like this? But when you actually see them interacting with the public, they have a professional demeanor that I understand and respect. But outside of that, you come away from it. And of course, that's where you're going to start having some personnel issues.
That's right. This year, we did employee forums on race and law enforcement. So after the death of George Floyd, we sent an open letter to our employees inviting them to take part in these discussions. Very difficult, very candid discussions that brought up any number of issues around race and policing. But one of the things that was raised is exactly what you're talking about. You have, for example, a black cop and a white cop in the car together, and you're policing in a certain neighborhood. And the white cop makes a comment about the people in that neighborhood, and the black cop doesn't say anything, but he's thinking, wait a minute, I look just like that person.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that?
And the white cop can get out of the car and deal with members of the public perfectly professionally and think that that's enough and that's okay, get back in the car and start to create a workplace environment that's not as supportive as it could be.
Absolutely. So we
Sorry, I got muted here. I'm just writing down some of the stuff that they're saying. I like to write things down and actually analyze it. But it's interesting they're talking about the white cop in the car with the black cop working together, and the white cop making a statement about the community that they're working in. Where are they getting this information from? They're romanticizing this idea. It sounds great. It sounds like something you would hear in a Lifetime movie. But is this actually going on in the police department? Absolutely not. John, you worked with black men, black females. So did I. I worked with all different races, different types, different sexual orientation. Didn't care. Didn't matter. And if we spoke about an area, we spoke about the crime levels. We didn't speak about the people. No one talked about the people as being having a problem with the people you work with. This is absolutely ridiculous. I didn't work with anyone that was discriminatory, anyone that was racist, anyone that was biased. We spoke about neighborhoods. Absolutely. Is there a crime problem? Are there issues with shooters and gangs? Sure. But this is ridiculous to actually romanticize this idea. Again, they bring up symptoms. They bring up problems. They don't tell you what the root causes is. And I'd also like to know, where did they get this information from? Did they actually get this from a specific black cop? Did they get this for some whistleblower here? This is absolutely ridiculous. I didn't work with anyone that had these biases or prejudice or racism. Again, manufactured bullshit. This is complete hogwash.
My friend's wife, pretty blonde girl. She's from the West Coast, right? She's from upper class in the West Coast. She moves to Harlem, right? Her apartment gets burglarized. She calls the cops. In upper Harlem, 2 black cops show up. And one of the black cops says to her, "You live in this neighborhood? Why do you live in this neighborhood? You shouldn't live in this. This isn't a good neighborhood. Why do you live in here? What are you doing out here from the West Coast?" And she was highly offended. She's like, "What do you mean? I don't understand." He's like, "I would never live in this neighborhood." And what was that neighborhood? It was a majority black and brown neighborhood, right? And he's sitting there telling her, "I wouldn't live in this neighborhood." Is that something that a cop should tell people? No, it's not. It's not professional. It's a little immature stating that, right? He doesn't know her circumstance, why she lives there, what it is. He's telling her this neighborhood's not good. But that's not a race thing. He's sitting there and he's a black guy, 2 black guys, and they're saying, "What the hell is a little white girl like you living in this neighborhood for?" And she told me the story, and she's still to today offended by it. And I laugh and I'm like, "Well, listen, they were just being honest with you." I said, at the end of the day, that you can't say that they were racist, right? They're 2 male black cops. At the end of the day, what do we want from people? Do you want honesty, or do you want them to lie to you? I said, I would have been more professional, and I would have said, "Oh, it's terrible what happened. We're going to do this, blah, 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 blah," and I'll leave. I said, but he actually opened up to you, and he told you, "What the hell are you doing living here?" Not a race thing at all. Maybe a little bit of immaturity. But I'd love to know how either of them know how this interaction takes out in the car when they've never had it. So I'd love to know where they're getting this from and where these stories are from. It's all made up. It's all on theory. It's all on the critical race theory.
We see that, and that type of work is critically important. And it's really important to change the culture and to get people to think differently about some of the challenges that we face internally in terms of how we treat each other, but as importantly, externally with the communities that we work in.
I mean, I think the internal stuff is really, really important, because if you can create a supportive workplace internally, you can put up with all sorts of shit externally.
Yeah.
Because you have that sense of a cohesive organization where there's space for everybody to participate and be part of the team.
But it starts from within.
Right.
And if you don't recognize that, then shame on you, because how we treat each other is just so critically important. And that power dynamic is huge. The NYPD has over 50,000 employees, 35,000 sworn, about 18,000 right now that are civilians. And there is a difference in policing and how we treat and think about our civilian employees and our uniform employees. And those dynamics play out daily.
I think it's something crime analysts have particularly experienced over the years because they're often dealing with decision makers and frontline officers. So instead of just being a sort of distant personnel, I don't want to denigrate in any way, shape, or form people who do personnel and payroll, especially if anybody's in Baltimore struggling to get their pay right now. But you've got some civilian staff who work really closely with the police. And I know that over the years, it's always a long-running issue, just talking to crime analysts about how they felt that it's been challenging in that kind of environment. And you've been there.
You know, I was there for many years, and I have a great deal of appreciation for the work that crime analysts do. But in a precinct, a crime analyst is a civilian with no rank who is reporting most often to a sergeant. And each of those units is going to act very differently based on the dynamic of that particular precinct and whether their input is valued, how it is received, how much they're able to contribute, how they're engaged, are they included?
Yeah.
Is all very much affected by people.
Just giving people a seat at the big table is a huge step.
That's right. When we talk about diversity, first, we often talk about it in terms of race and gender, which is fine. That's important. But then you think about all of the other ways that we differ in terms of sexual orientation, religion, life experience, everything that goes into the diversity. But a lot of the diversity in the NYPD is in the lower ranks. And so when you look up,
it starts to become a bit pale-male and stale, does it?
It does. And I've said this to the police commissioner. While we may be a diverse organization, we have a long way to go in terms of being an inclusive organization.
First of all, they've in this conversation, when you listen to this conversation, they debunked their own critical race theory. They've actually deviated from their own conversation by saying that there is a dichotomy between the relationship between the uniformed personnel and the civilian personnel. And she clearly deviates that there's no indication that has anything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, has nothing to do with sexual orientation, these other things. She actually talks about the difference between the way uniformed personnel perceives the civilian personnel, their level of respect, which has nothing to do with this DEI. But then, of course, they go back to this whole narrative and somehow throw in sexual orientation. That's why you have to listen to this conversation, listen to this narrative, the people that are live with us and anyone that listens recorded. Listen to what they're saying. They're just trying to fill your mind with fluff because it's all hogwash. Is there a dichotomy between the civilian and uniformed personnel of the NYPD? Absolutely. The uniformed personnel are the ones that are actually doing the police work. Is there a level of respect there? Yes, there should be. And if there isn't, that's another component. That's a relationship that has to build, and that's on leadership. It has nothing to do with DI. That's the leadership and that's about respect. The uniformed personnel respecting the civilian personnel and vice versa. But it has nothing to do with this DI. It has nothing to do with the diversity. So somehow she tried to entangle this, but it makes no sense. But then she goes on to say, and admits that the lower ranks are extremely diverse. But where do they have a problem? John Shell, you listen to this? Michael Kemper, the old white male, stale and pale. That's you, token pale white faces that are allowing this to continue. You don't say anything because you are either two things, self-serving for your own benefit, or because you're paving the pathway for your siblings and your offspring for the New York City Police Department. It's about who has to benefit. Because how could you not stand up in opposition to this? If you don't, you're a complete coward. And what we've seen is you are a coward. That's every white male we've seen in position that has never given any opposition, has never spoke out in regards to this. Still waiting for one. That person hasn't come yet.
I mean, dude, my head's about to explode. I honestly want to shut this live down because I can't even wrap my head around what I just heard. So she says exactly what you said. She says that the lower ranks are completely diverse. But when you start to look up top, right, then the white male jumps in. It becomes too male, too pale, and too stale, doesn't it? You know, and we could look at the upper echelon of the NYPD today, and what you're going to see is that it's predominantly black and brown, right? They were handpicked by the one-time police officer who was employed by the NYPD with 9 arrests to his name, Eric Adams. And what you see is they're a complete, utter disaster. They're actually worse than the old too pale, too stale, and too male former chiefs that were in the police department. They're shrouded in scandal. They don't even have careers that dictate why they should be up top. Some of them were detectives. They weren't even supervisors, right? One guy, he's running the job right now. So, I mean, we're not looking to make an organization better. And they're not sitting here attempting to sit there and paint the picture that they're looking to make the organization better. They're looking to make the leadership better, the structure better, the service to the people in New York better. No, that's not the mission at all. And that's not this conversation at all. This conversation is, let's get rid of the evil, old, pale, stale, male white man, right? That's what they want to do. They want to just get rid of that. This is the most racist conversation I ever heard. And it's coming from a female white and a male white. And then Eric, you always say, oh, they're paving the way for their kids. And I agree with you. They are paving the way for their kids. But are they really? Long term, what about their kids? What about their kids who are never going to attain the rank that they attained by hanging around the longest and holding the water for New York City Mayor Eric Adams and selling their future generations down a destructive path? What are they doing for their grandkids? They're destroying the job. They're destroying their own legacy. They're not, you're gonna get your son into becoming detective squad with 20 arrests and 6 months on the job, like they've all done. Michael Kemper, I'm talking to you. Dermot Shea, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to all you guys that have sons on the job. You made the job worse for your own son. And then when you go out even further to your grandkids, you should be thanking me and Eric right now for having the courage to have this conversation that you're unwilling to have. And not only don't you have the courage to have this conversation, you actually went along with it and pushed it. You're no better than these two. You're no better than these two. Absolutely horrendous. Let's listen to the academia professionals, just two knuckle draggers, giving our thoughts on it.
So if you think about the rank structure in policing and how you kind of slowly climb that greasy pole, if there was a lack of diversity 20, 30 years ago, that's going to manifest itself now in the top of the organization.
Absolutely.
So the officers you have who've got 5 years service or less are going to be hopefully reflective of the leadership in 20, 25 years time. But what you're looking at is the leadership that reflected what the organization looked like decades ago.
Often don't think about the long game though, right? So last year did some work with a captain here, Captain Coffey, fabulous, in thinking about women in policing.
It's in a dire state in the United States, and I just don't know why people don't see this.
I don't think they recognize what females bring to the table that's different than males. You know, what we did here internally is we surveyed female sergeants and said, why aren't you taking the lieutenant exam? Because if we can't get the female sergeants to take the lieutenant exam, then they can't become captains. Then they can't they can't move up if they're not there to begin with. Anything
in particular strike you?
A lot of it was work-life balance.
This job takes a toll.
And once you are motivated by certain things, then having the ability to have that balance is very important for females.
I'm guessing one of the areas here, but it's reflective of a broader societal expectation that more child rearing, for example, is dumped onto is me, no kids, is dumped onto women. Basically.
Absolutely. You know, we're a microcosm of society, and that's reflected in many ways, but we're doing a review of our patrol guide right now, right? So I sent an email to someone and I said, why is it in our patrol guide procedure for lost children that the child must stay with a female uniform member of the service?
Right.
It's patriarchy at its finest, right?
Yeah.
And some people are aghast, and then others are like, well, who else is going to watch them?
Clearly, again, this is people that are having
the patriarchy.
Exactly.
Patriarchy, yeah.
First of all, test their logic here, right? These are people that suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that means the least you know about a subject, the more you think you can do it. So let me educate them a little bit, because we're trying to get them on this podcast. So I'm sure eventually they'll get the information that there was a watch party done on their roundtable. So the reason why we have female officers watch juveniles and things of that sort is because there's no appearance of impropriety, and it's to protect the male officers from sexual allegations. But of course, this is coming from people that have no idea about police work. And I will affirm what they're saying here when it comes to females. I worked with females, and many of them want to have a career in law enforcement, but many find during their time in law enforcement, they would like to have more of a balance when it comes to family. They want to have that gender role and be the matriarch of their family. They want, in a patriarch society, which they're talking about, they want to have families. And that has nothing to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. They've decided, well, I'm not going to take the lieutenant's test or the sergeant's test because it's going to take more of my time in my career, and I would like to take more time in family. So again, there's nothing wrong with admitting to that gender role. This is absolutely ridiculous what they're saying here. If a woman decides she wants to balance her life more on career, she'll take that avenue. If she wants to have a family, well, she might take that avenue to stay more at home and not take that rank. And that's also on par. There's plenty of men I worked with that didn't want to take the rank of sergeant or lieutenant because that would take more time and more service to the career when they have other things going on in their lives. Some of them had businesses on the side. Some of them just didn't want to get promoted. They didn't want this to consume their lives. Again, more manufactured nonsense coming from these two, again, who have zero idea of police work. She's been watching the game, but she wasn't in the game. She is a civilian employee. She's not a law enforcement officer.
I wonder if she even has kids herself. I wonder if she just has cats in her apartment in the city. And I wonder if Jerry has kids too, because it is a maternal motherly instinct to want to be with your kids. It's not a social construct. Society didn't construct that.
Patriarchy.
Women, once they have the patriarchy, didn't invent this. It wasn't because they watched too many old Disney movies before they went woke and decided that, hey, I just birthed this, that I gave life to this child and I want to spend more time with it. There's nothing wrong with that. I know it's hard to understand because cats are very self-sufficient. So you can just feed the cat and leave it for a couple of days. And then, you could spend all your time being an atypical personality and further yourself in your career. But that's a person's choice. But Eric, you know why they don't even know about the males that don't want to take the rank? Because they don't care. They're not asking for them. They don't give a shit what you think. They don't even want you in there. They want Asian females. They want women who are mothers to do a job that they're saying, I can't do it any longer. I have a child. I have different responsibilities. This job isn't for me. This profession, this next rank isn't something I want to do anymore. So why are we going to force them to do that? Why are you going to force women to do? Why are we going to forced equity, forced diversity? It's actually called racism. It's called not equal opportunity. It's illegal. But this is what they're talking about. Let's get into the patriarchy further and see like what other horrible things these women who had children want to do and what we could force them to do. All right, let's see.
Very temerity that you would even ask that question.
Right.
But what does it say about how we think about women's role in the workplace?
Yes. And I think that we're doing a lot here to think about that. And we talk about issues in policing that affect women. How do you reconcile work-life balance? What does it mean if you're pregnant on the job? What are the implications for you? Emotional well-being, any number of things that affect employees generally, but may be very specific to women.
What are the things that have come out of that? I mean, what are the lessons for other departments?
What it's done, it's created a networking and a mentoring opportunity for women to come together, to know that they're not alone, to have an opportunity to talk through issues, to figure out ways to problem solve about issues that affect women in policing.
Mentoring outside of your own organizational structure with all the inherent problems of rank and just the workplace dynamics itself, I think that's an underappreciated benefit of thinking how to help people navigate through a policing career.
It certainly affects underrepresented groups in particular ways. The NYPD has made various attempts at mentoring over the years, and we have field training program, which some would consider mentoring. I do not. We have other programs, but to me, they're primarily orientation. So if you look over here on my board.
Hold on 1 second, Eric. I just want to stop this for 1 second. For those of you on Instagram, I apologize. We've been doing a watch party on this podcast, Reducing Crime, with the former Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion in the NYPD. She made some inflammatory statements, calling cops knuckle draggers, talking about how she was trying to defeat the patriarchy. She's talking about race and policing. This is a conversation between two male white British police officer and a female white who I contend only has cats in her apartment. So I apologize that we're just getting it to you now. So that's what we're doing right now. We're breaking down this whole interview. You could watch the entirety of this when we're done. We're going to post it on our social medias and again on YouTube and all of that. So apologies.
You'll see that mentoring is number 3 as we in the agency.
I can just about make that out. I mean, you have like a medical doctor's handwriting, but I get the gist of it.
We are.
You could call that whatever you want to call it.
We are thinking about that, and we're thinking about how to provide mentoring skills to more of our employees. Because navigating the NYPD or any organization really can be really challenging, and there is that part of the organization where it's not what you know, but it's who you know.
Right. Yeah, it's never something, of course, I've ever had to worry about because being a white male, I've never had to worry about looking around the organization, struggling to find somebody who looks like me.
That's right.
Can't find anybody that thinks like me, and that's probably a good thing, but they certainly all look like me.
Oh, there goes the white guilt again. You gotta love it. You gotta love it, dude. The white guilt. But of course, what does she do here, John? She solidifies everything we talk about this podcast. That it's not racism. It's all about nepotism. We've been talking about that. We're in 2024 in comparison to this is several years ago. So they're talking about the same things. These are issues of nepotism. John, I just want to go back to what you're saying. It's pretty funny for the viewers that are on Instagram watching this. But when I was single, I remember a guy telling me, I'll never forget, and no offense to any women out there if you're on this, don't date a woman that walks 2 dogs. And I love dogs. Or don't date a woman that has more than 1 cat. So I just got to laugh about that because she definitely is a cat person. But it's funny how they go into this. And when she was talking about this, she talks about, women in policing, and we have to find ways to address these challenging issues. I mean, what is wrong if a woman decides that she doesn't want to spend her time on this career and spend more time on family? I've seen women vest out, retire, resign early because they found that it was more important to put their life and put their efforts into having a family. And what's wrong? That's a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong. That's a God-given right that a woman has that they should take advantage of if they want to have children, have a family. There's nothing wrong with that. And if they want to balance both, that's fine. If they don't want to get promoted because they want to have a family, I don't see what's wrong with that. Are we supposed to tell them, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't have kids. Have more cats. You can be a lieutenant with more cats, but if you have kids, it's going to kind of slow you down. This is ridiculous. And of course, she keeps talking about what I've been talking about. The woke progressives love to give you these buzzwords. They don't tell you what they are. She just keeps telling you there's challenges, there's problems, challenges. What are those challenges? She doesn't tell you. But what she does tell you is pretty much what we've been saying. Nepotism. And it's far more egregious now than ever. Those are the real problems. Nepotism with the police department. Again, I say, the old guard of the upper echelon of the police department paving the way for their offspring, paving the way for the people that they know. She did allude to that, right? Who you know, it's not what you know. Well, that's true. And we see it now more now than ever. But it has nothing to do with being gay. It has nothing to do with being straight. I would even say most of it is not even to do with being black. I mean, look at Kaz Daughtry, right? He's Deputy Commissioner of Operations. He was not promoted to that civilian rank because he's a male black. He was promoted because of complete nepotism, because he is at the hand of Chief Madry. That's why he's in the position that he's at. Again, some of the comments that are coming in is just hysterical. Someone put the cats are killing me. wish you weren't true, but that's what we hear anyway. But you just hear the hogwash that comes from these two. Please, if you can, contact them on social media. Let them know Tanya Meisenholder or this Brit narrator here they have to come on this podcast because I'd love to have this conversation. Opposition meets opportunity. I would like to know the root cause of the problems that they actually present. Do they actually care about the stuff that they say? Or is it what John said? Is it to their financial benefit? Is it to their political gain? What are the root causes of this conversation? Hopefully we get them on here. I would say not likely because they're afraid of a real conversation, but that I would like to hear.
It's so they made a comment. She said about how diverse this is 2021. She was the commissioner who denied thousands of NYPD employees religious exemptions, and she was picking and choosing, completely violated New York State human rights law, completely violated the United States Constitution, and violated the NYPD's own OEO policy. We're still fighting that out in the courts, by the way, because New York City mayor is an absolute tyrant. So one of the reasons I left my career, because I was part of the patriarchy. So it's very easy to say that I wasn't religious, and they broke the law and denied my religious exemption. Same office actually denied medical exemptions as well. So, but what he says here is really funny. He never had a problem because when he looked around, he saw other people that looked like him. So everybody was like, oh, Jerry, we're going to give you this job because you look like us. Didn't happen, Jerry. And then he goes on to further state, well, but I never met anyone that thought like me. And you know why that is, Jerry? Because most men that go into law enforcement aren't complete leftist cucks like yourself. So that's why you haven't met too many men that will like you, because actually, we should actually be seeking to maybe push you into the third gender because you don't really carry the male trait. So maybe we should put you into a separate box there and do some surveys to find out what we could do to make you feel included, Jerry. We could make you feel included, that others think like you too. Let's go on and hear more about the patriarchy and how much we could learn from maternal cat mothers.
It will become a little bit more challenging for you. And then I think broadly in terms of the national landscape, we're doing some work on 30 by 30, which is the idea of increasing the representation of women to 30% by 2030.
That's the work that Moma Goff started when she was at the National Police Foundation and now at the Policing Project.
That's right. Phenomenal. So
Mo's been a guest on the podcast previously.
I listened to her. I thought she was great. I continue to think the work she does is critically important, and going to do my best to ensure that the NYPD signs up for that pledge and helps to move that work forward.
Do you think getting to 30% of the sworn workforce being women is attainable?
Yes, I do.
Do you think that's where we should stop? Because I was wondering why it wasn't 50%, which is where places like New Zealand are reaching for now.
I think we should continue to drive forward and increase it as high as we can go. Women bring so much to policing. When you think about the academic research and the differences in de-escalation and use of force, I think that is underestimated and undervalued. Can we get there? We can in the NYPD. Can you do it in other places? Some agencies don't have female officers at all right now, right?
Which is just astounding, isn't it? It's 2021, people.
It is.
Get with the program, for crying out loud.
We're at 19% of our sworn. We have much more on the civilian side, but our most recent recruit class was 24%. But when we talked about barriers earlier, you have to think about not only what it takes to hire them, but are they getting through the academy at the same rate as their male counterparts? Are they getting promoted? Are they taking advantage of civil service exams? Are they moving throughout the organization?
And I'm always astounded when I hear.
First of all, this should be insulting to women, because listen to what she's saying. She's basically saying that you're no good if you have a maternal instinct as a mother. If you want to go out and have a family, you're no good. If you want to go out and have a family of cats, those are the women that we want in policing. We want the women that have cats at home. We don't want the women that want kids and families. Those women we don't want. That's what she's saying. But yet somehow he's saying we should get 50% of females. This is so ridiculous. Every woman that's watching this, if you're a female police officer, you're in law enforcement, you should be insulted by this narrative. This is absolutely ridiculous that they have to try to target females. But let's get the ones that like cats. Because if you're a woman in police and you have a kid, no good. Shame on you. You made a mistake. And you know what, John? You know what I realized from listening to this? You made a mistake too, John. Because when you filled out your reasonable accommodation that you didn't want to take the jab, you should You should have went wearing a skirt. You should have said, even though I'm married with kids, I actually identify as a gay man, and I would like to know about my sexual orientation. You should have given them sexual data on your religious orientation, and you should have told them that you enjoy sex with another man, and you still would be employed by the NYPD. You be a chief right now working with Kaz Daughtry. You could be working with John Shell, because you would have the right tools. You would have the inclusion that they want. But John, unfortunately, you are a straight alpha white male, and you got penalized for it. And that's what's going on here. That's the real narrative out of this. They had a problem with retention, and they find a way. Let's get rid of these alpha white males, and we'll replace them with the inclusion, the people that we think see fit to fit into this organization, because it has to be a safe space. I don't even feel safe listening to this. This is a crazy narrative. I can't believe that this was going on while we're still employed by the New York City Police Department. This is sick. This is really sick, honestly. And I hope that people actually listen to this, and I hope that one day that a narrative like this is in front of Congress. Congress needs to hear how ridiculous this infection. And she says it on the national level. Talks about the 30-30. We see how well that worked out for the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And listen, if there's a female who's organically, let's pick the best females. I worked with some females that are great. But again, and they had families. Shame on them that they had kids, apparently, with this patriarch society. This is so ridiculous. I honestly, I'm just disgusted by listening to this conversation. But I look forward to hear what else could actually come out of the mouths of these two.
So one, I don't understand why we're talking about policing. Like, why aren't we seeking to get 50% of plumbers to be women, 50% of the roofers to be, 50% of the firefighters to be women? I was on a space the other day, and I talked about the emasculation of police, and a female reporter came over and she said, John's been talking about the feminism of policing. And I said, not necessarily the feminism. I'm not relating it to a specific gender. I'm saying that in policing, you need masculine traits to be successful, right? And across the male spectrum, we're seeing less masculine males. We're seeing less masculine women. In order to be successful in policing, you need to exhibit masculine traits. You need to be physically in shape. You need to be able not to be afraid of people. You need to know how to interact with people, how to have discussions with people, how to think around things, how to be in high dynamic situations. And they're not saying that we need the best, most competent people here. They just want to check boxes and fill boxes. And you're right, Eric. If I would have did that, maybe I would have stayed. But they sent thousands of people like myself, I'm going to say right now, disproportionately male whites, out of policing, out of the NYPD, and they still didn't meet the diversity goal because it's ridiculous. And they're never going to meet their diversity goals because they don't make sense. Because women traditionally don't want to be plumbers. Mothers traditionally don't want to work on the drop of a dime and run to work and run out. They just traditionally don't want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. So they're not actually looking to make anything inclusive. They're not actually making to look anything fair. What she's saying here is if you're not from the leftist academia mindset, you're no good and we don't want you in policing. And this is exactly who we put in charge of the NYPD. This is who's in charge of the NYPD. Leftists, academia, civilians with no children who are cat mothers. That's who's been put in charge. And even the diversity alligator came and ate her because she wasn't diverse.
And learn of organizations that, let alone analyze it, are not even collecting that kind of information. They just don't think it's relevant. As long as they have a class, they're fine.
I understand the fiscal issues, the technical issues, the capacity issues, if you will, that some agencies might have in collecting that information. I cannot reconcile that agencies don't want to collect as much information as possible on any number of factors, including their employee demographics. In 2020, we started to post our employee demographics online for the first time. And transparency is something that we're very much committed to. And if we don't currently collect it, we have to think about how can we collect it. But the challenge with that is when you think about collecting particular pieces of information around religion or sexual orientation, how do you do that in a way that's practical for the organization and fair to the employees?
Where is the level at which point the organization is capable of reflecting the diversity of the community, but also down to what kind of level? Are we down to the stage where we're starting to worry about the demographic structure of all the officers at each precinct matching the demographics of the people who live in those precincts? At what kind of organizational level do you go, we need some flexibility here?
So right now we're in the midst of police reform, like many agencies throughout.
Kind of feels like we've been in the midst of police reform since about 1993.
Right. But in New York specifically, we are under Executive Order 203, Governor Cuomo's order to reform and reimagine policing. And we've held a number of sessions where we've invited people to provide input to the department on how they think policing should change. And one of the primary items that has been raised over and over again is the idea that the police officers should be more reflective of the people in the communities that we serve. So the question that I always ask when that comes up is, what is it that people actually want? Do they want someone that looks like them because they believe they will understand them more and can relate to them more? Or do they just want to be treated with respect and professionalism?
Yes. Do I need to look like you to understand where you are and to treat you with respect and relate to you?
That's right. And in policing, as you well know, there is at times an us versus them dynamic that plays out in powerful ways when you have so much power over others.
And that can cross racial boundaries.
It absolutely does. Policing shouldn't be something that we do to people. It should be something that we do with people. In the NYPD, I can say that by law, we are not allowed to place individuals in any command for any reason beyond language. So even if I wanted to say, I want to make sure that there's X percentage of Y people in a particular precinct, legally, I'm not able to do that.
That's really interesting. So there's legal protections, support staff in some regards, but hinder their capacity in other regards to be able to work in districts that are reflective of the people that are around there.
More hogwash. It's funny. TC puts here, what happens when neighborhood demographic change? Do we fire the cops? That's true. We do see neighborhoods gentrify. We see white flight that happens in neighborhoods. This is absolutely ridiculous. That I'm curious. I would like to speak to the community. And let's ask the community exactly what they want. You know what they want? They want effective police officers. They want police officers that keep their neighborhoods safe. They want enthusiastic. They want police officers that have a good work ethic. And I can tell you this because I've worked in various communities throughout New York City. They can care less what you look like, what you sound like, who you love, your sexual orientation data, what's going on. They want to know that you actually do the job. That are you willing to chase a perpetrator with a legal firearm that is shooting at kids? Are you willing to face those adversaries? Are you willing to go into a fire to save people in that neighborhood? Are you willing to show compassion to an elderly woman who's walking across the street? Are you willing to stop that car occupied by perpetrators that just robbed a local convenience store armed with AK-47s inside that car? That's what they want to know. They want to know that you have the fortitude and the courage to New York City police officer. They could care less what you look like, where you're from, what you love. When it comes down to brass taxes, they want people that can keep them safe. That's the reality. That's the respect that they want. The respect that you care about their community, that you care about them and their family. You should want to go home safe, and you should want the public safe. This is more hogwash speaking by woke progressives that have no idea about police work. She has zero idea about police work. She's just been watching it from her couch, but she was never in the game, so she thinks she knows the game.
It's hysterical to hear them talk about equal opportunity law and how we shouldn't hire and fire people based upon their race and how it hinders them. It's a hindrance that we can't just move. Just throw some blacks in there. Just take the whites out. Throw a couple of Asians in there. And she's like, I can't believe it's not legal. Like we're bound by all of these constraints. Yeah, it's called the civil rights movement. It's called equal opportunity. It's called not hiring based upon someone's skin color. It's about treating people as individuals and not looking at them and group identifying them based on their skin tone. You could have a black dude that is not, and you throw him in a black neighborhood, and he's not a good fit for that neighborhood. And you could have an Italian dude or an Irish dude, and they're a great fit for that neighborhood. You know why? Because they grew up in that neighborhood, or they grew up in the bordering neighborhood, and they understand the demographics of the neighborhood, and they understand how it works. But yeah, TC brings up a great point. What happens when the demographics of that neighborhood change? All right, we got to get ready now. There's more Italians moving out towards Jersey, so we're going to stick you in the South Shore of Staten Island. You Italian guys, you got to get out of the Bronx. You're out of Bensonhurst. You're not here no more. We're going to move the Chinese over here, and then we're going to – this is what they're talking about. These people are insane. These people are absolutely insane, and what they're talking about is completely illegal, but they're making it sound really nice. They're making it sound really nice. So, let's continue to hear, because I'm getting educated here. I'm learning about how much smarter they are, and I'm understanding why they have PhDs. And Jerry, it's close to my heart. Jerry, I'm looking forward to coming on your podcast. I'm looking forward to you coming on here. We can't wait, Jerry.
It's incredibly challenging.
It is. We got sued many years ago when we made the decision to place a large group of Black males in a particular command, and we lost.
I mean, I can understand the lawsuit because it's a horribly challenging situation, because where you are posted to, or where you are assigned to, can have huge career implications for you.
And think about it. The NYPD right now is 15.4% Black, right? Even if we wanted to, try and match the demographics of our employees to the demographics of all of our commands, we can't. It's really complicated. That's
well,
not to
you
say
balance
that we
one
don't.
thing, you might lose another. So you can improve in terms of people of color, but then you might lose out more in terms of LGBTQ IA+ community members. And that's a factor as well, right?
Right. And most of the times we don't even know who some of those employees are unless they tell us. So I think I understand the discussion around having the police department be reflective of the particular community, and I support it, but I think it's very complex and nuanced. And for me, what I want to understand more is the root cause or reason of in what people are actually asking for.
It's 2021. We don't do complex and nuance. We do simplistic and uninformed. That's how we tend to do things nowadays. I'm interested to learn a little bit more about the forums that you had after George Floyd, because I can imagine that was really challenging. Did you get much engagement?
It was received differently by employees. I think when the initial invitation went out, there was a lot of surprise and skepticism about what the agency was doing and why we were having these forums on race and law enforcement.
Well, every precinct's got their conspiracy theorists that love to spread the underlying what's going on.
That's right.
Because they found out on a website that doesn't,
And
somewhere.
the NYPD certainly has its skeptics and conspiracy theorists, just like
The rumor mill.
anywhere else. So we had hundreds of employees. We had over 40 forums where we brought people together and had really challenging discussions around race. And a number of things came up in terms of the conflict that some of our employees feel as a person of color and as
Understandably.
Absolutely. And as a police officer, and their words, not mine, but the idea of being Black and being blue and what that means. And we talked a lot about their personal experiences and what it's like to be in uniform as a Black male with a cop, and then walking around in your neighborhood at night in sweatpants with a firearm, and the differences that entails. It was very much a learning moment for many of the people that took part.
Was there anything that came out of it that really surprised you?
No, it wasn't surprising, but it was heartbreaking at times to hear some of the stories and some of the experiences that our own employees have had.
I think I'm speaking to a few Black cops going around on the field work that I've been doing. It seems that post George Floyd, they had to deal with a lot more at home after work.
Absolutely. We heard of people losing friendships, of people losing family members, where others that were not law enforcement could not reconcile how an individual person could stay in this career and be a cop. I think that was really, really hard for many of our employees. I think it caused challenges within the agency among our employees who felt a certain way. And then when you bring politics into the mix, and the
Which is everything
recent
nowadays, isn't it?
That's
Everything
right.
is politics.
recent presidential election, then that caused a lot of divisiveness and conflict within the agency as well.
2020.
Again, this goes back to what I'm saying. Here's two people that have clearly no idea about police work. Now, I don't know where this Brit worked as a police officer. And I say this Brit, Jerry, I have no idea where he worked as a police officer. And England, obviously he's from the UK, is arguably just as diverse as New York City, or maybe even more diverse. And they have the woke progressive movement in England just as they do in America. And clearly Jerry is right behind that. He's a progressive law enforcement. It's interesting how discriminatory and how racist these two are towards blacks. Far more than this so-called white male that they're talking about, right, John? What do they say here? That the black police officer has a problem when he's walking his gun in sweatpants. Now, for anybody who's on this thread right now, if you're a cop, I don't care if you're black or white, especially when I was doing special operations, it looks ridiculous when you carry a firearm in sweatpants, unless you have some type of thunder and undercover. But if you're wearing sweatpants and you have your firearm, it's extremely difficult to conceal. I don't care if you tie that string as tight as possible around your waist to where you can't breathe. It always looks obtuse unless you have some big sweatshirt. It looks strange. But how discriminatory is that? How kind of insulting is that to male blacks? That male blacks only walk around with guns and sweatpants. They don't wear jeans. They don't wear shorts. They just wear sweatpants. They wear sweatpants and flip-flops. I think that was insulting right there. That was a racist comment. I mean, I'm sorry. If you're a white male and you're walking with sweatpants with your firearm, it's never going to be the same as you conceal in jeans or a different type of pants. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Again, we're learning how to be black and blue from two white people. I love it. I love it. And, you know, they don't talk about the nuances in anything. They're just shocked to find out that there's differences of opinion. There's differences of opinion that don't have a leftist, Democrat, indoctrinated mindset, right? The presidential election. Tanya, I could tell already who you voted for. You voted for Biden, right? And now all of a sudden, Kamala Harris is doing a great job. I'm sure you're with her now. You're so excited. You're so reinvigorated now that, you know, you're with Kamala Harris. You hear, you know, they talk about politics like it's a bad thing and we should be apolitical, but you hear their leftist narrative being painted all over this interview, you know, and they don't talk about, again, we're not concerned with male whites at all. We don't care, right? Again, I was arrested as a youth. I was stopped hundreds of times. I would tell kids in the academy all the time, black kids in the academy, I've been stopped more times by the police than any of you. I was like, so I don't want to hear shit about racist. The cops are racist. That you're hanging out in the park, you're doing dumb shit. The cops are going to come in and you're hanging around people you shouldn't. You're going to get your balls broke. It is what it is. That's the state of New York. That's how it was at that time. It wasn't because I was a darker skin, because my skin tone's a little dark. It had nothing to do with the color of my skin. It had to do where I was at the times I was and who I was with. And the minute I went to work and I stopped hanging out in the park and I stopped staying out late at night and putting myself in scenarios where there would be problems, guess what? The cops never bothered me again. You know, it's and the same holds true regardless of the color of your skin. If you're gonna do dumb things, you know, it is what it is. And I've interacted with black cops off duty, and I've interacted with white cops off duty, and so, you know, sometimes people are understanding, and sometimes people are like, what are you stopping me for? I'm like, well, it's not because you're black. It has to do because the tints on your window were dark. It had to do because your gun lifted while you were riding your bike. Some stupid shit like that. You know what I mean? And you get in the attitude, what are you stopping me for? You know, it even happened with somebody in the SBA one time at a job that I won't get into here, but, you know, had the same attitude. Like, oh, it's because I'm black. It's like, nah, bro, it's because you just walked into a crime scene with your fucking hoodie up and didn't identify yourself. It had nothing to do with the fact that you were black. You know, so why don't you identify yourself? And that's what you hear coming out of them is that there's not nuances in every race and every person, and there's not individualities. We all need to just accept this progressive mindset that they believe in. We all just need to believe that inflation is a great thing, and open borders and keep less people in prisons keep us safe. If we all do that, the world will be a better place. Remember, we were going to heal after Joe Biden? I'm sure, Tanya, you were posting time to heal like the rest of the leftist civilian women in the NYPD were doing at the time.
John, what are your thoughts on blacks in sweatpants? What are your thoughts on that comment? Black cops wearing sweatpants.
Shit, they're smarter than all of us.
Yeah.
And they're showing you how racist they are. This entire conversation just shows how racist they are. Black people use drugs. Black people wear sweatpants and carry firearms. You know, the whole thing is this whole conversation just shows who they are and how discriminatory they are. And I hope whatever lawyers are listening to this and listen to this podcast, I hope you're using this in your defense for religious accommodations that were denied, women that were sexually harassed, people who were denied medical exemptions. I hope you're going to take this and show just how biased this woman is and just how biased the overall well-being of the New York City Police Department was. This entire mission, this was done. The union should be jumping up and down over this. The union should be jumping up, and they should have been jumping up and down in 2021. You know, they should be jumping up and down.
A horrible year.
It was a challenging year, to say the least.
Has policing dealt with that, with its history?
Not very well. I think some agencies have made various attempts, and that could be by making statements about acknowledging the history that law enforcement has played. There are certainly agencies who have not necessarily history, but are doing stuff to make strides. So, for instance, a number that have signed up for implicit bias training, ourselves included. For the NYPD, one of the things that has come out of the race forums is that we are creating a curriculum for our recruits that really goes deep into the history of policing and provides explanations to our newest members about why some people in the community feel the way they do and what it's going to mean for them as they walk out the door.
That's the key part, right? What it means for them. In other words, how they're going to have to think about when they interact with the public in some of the communities that we have.
That's right. If you haven't had your own life experience, or you're not close to someone that has, then it's very difficult to understand why that's important to someone else.
If I'm in a police department that's not really thought about this probably as much as I should, where to start? Where would you start?
Start talking to people. Listen more, talk less. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is very nuanced, very complicated. And there are folks that can really talk to you about what it means for your agency and how to drive change forward. But you need to start having those conversations. You know, equity is about fairness. Are your policies fair? Are they treating women differently than they're treating other groups?
Well, I know there's been a lot of issues around physical fitness tests for entrance exams.
Physics test, I think that's a really important part, and I know there's a lot of work that's been done on that with several women in the field.
People like Yvonne Roman are working in it, for example.
And so what we do in the agency is we go to survey each of our recruits when they decide to leave the academy. We certainly know that women fail the physical at a higher rate than men. And what should we do about that?
And I also think that there's a more fundamental.
Again, insulting women. This, you know what? I realize this is a racist podcast. This is discriminatory against women. This is discriminatory against blacks. If women are failing at a higher rate, there is a reason for that when it comes to gender roles and when it comes to the men do have, let's be honest, it has nothing to do with feminism or patriarchy. Men do have more muscle mass and have more physicality than men. That's why we see the difference in combat sports. We're seeing it right now in the Olympics, which is ridiculous. Men facing women. I think it's sad. I think a woman's going to die in that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's nothing against women, but this is so discriminatory because the women out there that do have the capabilities and do have the physicality to do the job, it's a complete insult to you. This is absolutely ridiculous. But They talk about resembling the communities. I mean, listen, right now we have two-spirit. We have people that could be two-spirit to the NYPD. You could be male, female. Are we going to have two-spirit cops match two-spirit communities? Are we going to go out and make sure? Oh, you know, if you decide to chop off your wiener as a New York City police officer, you going to work in a neighborhood that everyone chopped off their wiener? Like, how far is this going to go that you're reflective of the community? Because they talk a lot about sexual orientation, sexual data. This, again, this is the most discriminatory, ridiculous podcast I've heard, and my blood is boiling. Anyone should be insulted by this. These two should not have their fingers anywhere near law enforcement. Their ideology is just insane. There is no common sense. How about we have common sense people reflect communities? Because that's what they want. I can't wait. Honestly, John, I can't even wait till this is over. I'm sick of listening to these two because it's just, I can't believe what's coming out of their mouths, and people actually stayed quiet. The New York City Police Department stayed quiet while someone like this is in a position of power, a civilian employee that's in a position of power. I mean, we have civilian employees now that are in position of power that have no business. Also, this infection is wild. I can't believe I'm hearing this.
I mean, so they basically proved the whole point that we've been saying. You know, we've been getting called racist a lot. We've been getting said that because we continuously say that diversity, equity, inclusion has lowered standards across the board. And consistently we get pushed back saying that, where's the evidence of that? So here it is. We lowered the evidence according to the Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion for the NYPD, former, and I'm sure it's gotten worse since this point. We lowered standards on the psych evaluation, which I think is probably the most important one out of anything that we're going to evaluate somebody for, a characteristic we're going to evaluate somebody for before we give them a gun and actually give them arrest authority and the ability to take away your constitutional rights of freedom, right? To put slap handcuffs on you and take you to jail. I think we're going to go to that one first and say that's the most important. So we lowered standards there, so that we could make it more diverse. We can make everything more diverse. Then she went on to admit that they lowered standards with the amount of drug use that's acceptable because, as Jerry says, blacks use drugs, right? That's not racist at all. That wasn't a racist statement. So because they use drugs, we lowered that. Because they commit crime, we let more crime and more criminal behavior in the background because that's part of the culture. Part of black culture is using drugs and being crime. But they're not the racists, Eric. Me and you are the racists for having that conversation. And there you go again. What does she just say? She says we lowered standards for what? Physical fitness. So you lowered the overall standards to bring in this racist ideology of diversity, equity, inclusion. You lowered standards across the board, right? Your character, your mental well-being, and your physical health. We lowered all those standards. So your entire profile, we lowered standards for to supposedly force fairness, equity, and equality. And what they did is actually remove it. And it's wild. Let's end this off, give a final thoughts, because I'm with you. I got dumber. I lost brain cells every time we played this clip. I mean, this is amazing. And you know, I'm ready to go back to college. I'm going to go to college. I think I need my PhD.
You need to be in academia.
I want to be just as smart as Tanya and Jerry.
I will say this. I will say this, though. I'm glad that she wasn't around during Jim Crow, because if it would be up to her, our neighborhood would be all black. The cops would be black. They have black bathrooms, black drinking fountains. This is absolutely ridiculous. She doesn't realize, like, she's just completely like thrown away the civil rights movement. This is just racist. That's it.
Eric, I'm going to move you to the 6-6 because there's a lot of Jews there, right? So we're going to just dump you over there in Borough Park, all right? You know how to talk to them, right?
Oh, sure. Gotta get a good rabbi.
The mental issue, which policing has never yet really come to grips with. How physical a job is it?
Out of all of our standards, what I'd like to think about is, like, how often have you actually run that far or climbed that fence? And I'm not the right person to ask, but someone should be asking those questions.
Well, I was a cadet. I mean, you know, most people could get away from me, but if they ran across an obstacle course or an assault course, oh, I've got them. Let's go.
That's right. But in the NYPD, you pass these physical standards test when you come in, and then never again.
Yeah. I think that what's interesting is that you've embraced these forums, which is something a lot of agencies haven't done. And I think some of them are just scared to open that box to see what comes out. But it doesn't mean just because you have the forums that people are going to rush to leave the organizations. But it's the right step in terms of keeping them rather than just kind of ignoring the issues.
For me right now, it's having listened, having learned, as I learn every day. You have to get very comfortable being uncomfortable as a middle-aged white woman. And I think it's, where is the agency going as a result of these forums and this internal engagement, in terms of all of the external engagement that we've done as part of police reform? And if you think about the overlap, many of our employees are community members. So some of the same issues come up. And how do you reconcile that? And how do you impact a culture that is generation after generation? And there are things about the culture that you don't want to change. And then there are things that have to change. And I say the word culture loosely because it's cultures, right? Each precinct has its own culture.
Sometimes just on a tour or a shift.
That's right.
Well, there's a lot of work that has to be done. So it's great that you're in here doing it and spending your time with me. And thank you very much. Though I will say there's one thing you did get wrong.
What's that?
You're not middle-aged. I know you. I know you're just a youngster. Tanya, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Hopefully.
But you know what she still is? She's still a white woman. She might not be middle-aged, but she's still a white woman. She had to throw that in there. And of course, Jerry, we got your number, man. We got your number. This is absolutely ridiculous. Oh, let's lower the standards. I mean, it's funny. Now we know exactly where this ideology came from. What's her name? Juanita Holmes. Didn't Juanita Holmes say that you don't have to run a mile and all this? So we know where she got her information up, because she's a dumb idiot who couldn't come up with this on her own, because you're not going to run a mile. Oh, so it's not possible that you run a couple of blocks and that your heart goes to acceleration and gets exacerbated, and you need to have that capabilities under your belt so that you could actually withstand that and survive. This is absolutely ridiculous ideology. Again, someone that suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect, who's never done policing. I mean, at least at that point, she admits, I didn't do policing. But it's absolutely ridiculous. Busta Malaka just put, what are her pronouns? Exactly that. I mean, white guilt, trying to placate to this woke progressive ideology, trying to destroy the law enforcement profession. And what did they do? They did. They accomplished it. They accomplished it. We can see it right now. We see the phenomenon. We see police officers getting assaulted at an alarming rate. They do not have the physical capabilities to do the job as we've seen before. We do have some outliers, but we see a lot of young police officers that are completely out of shape. I'm 44 years old. John's 43 years old. We continue to stay in shape. And I can tell you right now, I'm not bragging, and neither is John. We can put the uniform and do the job today. John went out, despite the fact that he's not gay, despite the fact that he's not black and doesn't carry his gun in sweatpants, he was able to do 23 pull-ups in front of his kid without stretching. But he's a bad white male. You're a bad man. I don't know what kind of white men they're talking about. I mean, I'm Jewish. You're Italian. Apparently, we're all homogenous. I don't know. I guess there's no difference amongst that. There's no difference being Jewish or Italian in different parts of Europe or Israel. That doesn't matter. We're all categorized into white. We're just demons. I know I'm a demon. I'm a blue-eyed white devil. Again, I'm so glad this is over. I'm sure you're glad this is over, but this is our perspective. And I'm sure I see some of the comments are completely in line with what we're thinking here, but we're saying it out loud. We're speaking the truth. Terrence Monahan, Jimmy O'Neill, Dermot Shea, Michael Kemper, John Schell, Essig, LePetri. We can go on days for this. Where are you to speak against this? What about nice guy Joe Fox? I'm sure this is going on the Civilian Complaint Review Board because we hear it, but none of them are speaking out, right? Listen, you've heard it here. This is racist, not you.
Yeah, Eric named the majority of the chief token pale white faces that currently ran or run or are considered the police experts and the complete. Add Bill Bratton into that one too. Bill Bratton, chief token pale white faces. So follow us on social media. We got all our X handle, Instagram handles, our individual, as well as the podcast stuff. See the memes we're putting out. We have links to buy this T-shirt and some other stuff down below. please like and subscribe. To the cops that are afraid to like and subscribe, make a fake handle, like and subscribe. Come on, stop being so scared of the police department. Your First Amendment rights, absolutely ridiculous. You're going to be scared of Shell and Kaz. What are they going to do to you? They're transferring you anyway. More than likely, if you do anything, they're going to transfer you anyway. I think, to wrap the whole thing up, listening to this, thanks for everyone that stayed with us the entire time. I just want to know, like, we have Italian males, we have Irish males, we have Jewish males, we have Polish, Russian, Albanian. We have all these people that we consider white, but they're never considered part of the community. You heard her say it. She goes, oh, we have people that are part of the community. I was part of the community. I lived in New York City my entire life until you forced me out of my career, denied my religious beliefs, didn't care that I had a different thought about something, didn't care that I had natural forming antibodies, didn't care that you were asking me to go along with a lie and violate my conscience and ultimately violate my religion. You didn't care about any of that. And I was a community member. Why doesn't my voice count? Why doesn't Eric's voice count? Why doesn't the Albanian immigrant that just came here's voice count? Why doesn't the Russian immigrant voice count? Why doesn't all of our voices count? They sit here and they talk about individualism and they want to promote everybody to be individuals. And what they really sat there and told us throughout this whole interview was they don't want you to be an individual at all. They want you to align completely to this leftist, woke, progressive agenda. The NYPD is a woke organization, and they lowered standards for absolutely no reason other than to push a racist ideology. And thank you, Tanya, for driving those points home today on this podcast. It was a real in-depth eyesight into the mind of the civilian women who run the NYPD and what they do. They're heavily tied to political parties, heavily tied to political leftist Democrat candidates. And this is their mind frame. So it was as much as I lost a lot of brain cells, it was a great discussion. I thank everybody for staying around. Eric, any final thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I lost brain cells, but I learned a lot. If you're a woman, get a cat. Don't have a kid. If you're a man on the job, cut your wiener off. Be a two-spirit. Change your sexual orientation. If you're white, paint your skin. Don't be that white alpha male. This is absolutely ridiculous, but I'm glad that we heard it. You heard it here too. And what is important to note about this is that the Finest Unfiltered never saw this till now. So everything that we've been saying on this podcast, we hit the mark. Exactly what's going on in the upper echelon of the police department. It's been affected by people just as you see here, by Tanya, by people just like herself, and of course. So stay tuned with us. New York's Finest Retired Unfiltered Podcast 265 Police Live Series. We'll be back out with you. More comment. Leave your comments. We appreciate it. If you want to send a donation, it's a self-funded podcast. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Take care.
Shout out to all the knuckle draggers who actually do the work instead of the civilians that don't do anything but get high salaries.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime, but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?
Law enforcement professionals dedicate their lives to serving and protecting our community. But who's protecting their financial futures? That's where Laidlaw Blue comes in. Our wealth management platform is specifically designed for the law enforcement community. Laidlaw Blue is a division within Laidlaw Wealth Management, run by retired New York City detective John McDermott. His status as a retired detective uniquely positions him to establish a deep connection between Laidlaw Blue and the law enforcement community. Our platform is easy to use and provides a range of financial services, including investment management, retirement planning, and insurance solutions. With Laidlaw Blue, you can secure your financial future and provide for your loved ones. Our team of experienced financial advisors understands the unique challenges and opportunities that law enforcement professionals face. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of financial planning and achieve your goals. Laidlaw Blue. Secure your financial future today. Book a meeting using the QR code displayed or call us directly on 888 901 Blue. That's 888 901 Blue.